Hello, my name is Roman Bible. I am the research resource intern here at Fresh Arts, and today I'm going to be interviewing the amazing Robert Kimberly. Nice to see you again.
Nice seeing you.
Nice to um, so we're bringing you on board. You're currently, remind me the exact title that you have now at MeowWolf.
I'm part of the Art and Scenic Department within the Exhibitions Department at MeowWolf Houston's Radio Tave exhibition.
Like, and that's how you properly say it. I was struggling the whole time I was there. I'm like, what is the proper way to say this? Is it Tave? Is it Tave? Is it,
It's
I don't
Tave.
know, Tave? That's
Yeah.
what I figured. Um, so I actually got to meet you, just some background of how we know each other for our audience is that I met you back when I was doing my my graduate program at UH for the Arts Leadership program, and you were still working with the Blacker Museum, and you had just did an installation there. And then that's when we kind of got to talking. We kept in contact, and now that I'm with Fresh Arts, I figured it'd be a fun time to interview you with all your transitioning and new opportunities you've had.
Yeah.
So, let's kind of to start things off. Can you go ahead and tell us some more about yourself and about your career, where you started, how you got where you are now?
Yeah. So I've been doing art and installation and museum adjacent work off and on for over 25 years now. Originally started at the Museum of Fine Arts, the New Orleans Museum of Art, washing dishes in their cafe. And that was after my graduation. And I just landed there and under the hopes of finding a job, better be in the building than outside of it. And that actually worked to my advantage. And I did get hired. And that was the beginnings of a very young me learning things about art installation. And and then it carried on. And but also because we were paid so poorly, one of the art handlers I was working with is like, "Okay, would you like to earn some more money?" And I said, of course. So started working as a stagehand and just kind of shifting equipment around for an audiovisual production company that just provided staffing for work. And the reason I bring that up is because it's actually been that side job and jobs much like it has really kind of informed my art installation work to a degree, in part because those places have solutions for big, complicated, often illuminated and audio arrays. Um, and so it was the beginning of working in places where solutions could kind of cross pollinate between art and other things that are adjacent, but not paintings on the wall or just sculptures on the floor. After that, moved to Las Vegas, followed my wife there, and actually worked for the not very long existing Guggenheim Las Vegas, Guggenheim Hermitage venues that were housed in the Venetian Casino. And it was a nonprofit, for-profit collaboration between the two that actually suffered as a result of opening up directly around the time of 9/11.
Hmm.
So it was interesting seeing that was a massive installation. They'd invested a huge amount of money, and it is no longer with us. So it's weird to work at a museum where there's the museum is gone, but that is such the way it is in Vegas. Um, Followed my wife to Atlanta. Worked at the Atlanta Center for the Arts and worked for a couple of galleries, and also worked for the Performing Arts Center on the campus of University Georgia Tech. And again, more theater and stagehand work that is, I find, very complementary to art installation. Different mentality, but often very similar personalities working in the art installation community. And it's all in service of artwork, in service of artists and performance and presentation and a very collaborative process, but also one where we really should, once things are handed off to us, um, they feel like they can kind of spin off and do their own thing while other things happen in the room. Um, Directors, producers, curators, artists, all those sorts of folks. And then made my way down to Houston, living with my wife, and started freelancing in town because I did not know anyone in Houston, and worked for the Houston Center for excuse me, the Houston Center for Photography. Freelanced a lot. Found other installation jobs. Eventually found my way to the New Orleans, excuse me, the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, where I worked there for 10 years, the Blaffer for about 2 years, and now I'm starting my 9th month at MeowWolf Houston.
Oh wow! So you've just been everywhere, like such a journey in this whole entire career.
Yeah, it's been really fun, and the freelancing is what it was fun in part because it offered a lot of flexibility, and then working at the Museum of Fine Arts is I kind of consider that my PhD program because I did not get a PhD, so like that was really the scale and frequency of art installation there was where you learned a lot, and also a lot over a short period of time. So
Oh, I'm sure that's a huge just area to work through and work all those exhibitions. Do you remember like your first exhibition there? Like which one you got to like work on, or do you have a favorite?
it was a traveling Egyptian show, so it wasn't curated by the museum, but it was brought in by the museum, and it was being de-installed, and so it was these massive works, and it was actually being overseen by a crew that was, I believe it was Thai Art, which is a local firm that provided staffing, and so it was unusual in part because it was not completely overseen by the museum staff, but after that, it was almost entirely shows that were coordinated, overseen, developed by the staff at the museum. So that,
That
that
it's so cool. Like it's. I guess I'm curious now. What do you think is? I guess I would say probably. I'm assuming the installation is probably harder than the de-installation.
yes, usually there's kind of a basic idea that a de-installation can take about a third of the time as an installation, because there's less to little decision making, um, less input from other people other than the installers, um, and then depending on whether or not the works that are being de-installed are either from the museum's collection or not, you may have visiting couriers who represent the other venues and the other museums overseeing the care and handling of their works.
How? What's the average? Like trying to think of how to phrase it. This is going off script now, but
Yeah.
what is like? What's the general setup of like an installation team? Like who all do you work with besides like the curator and the artist? Is there like do they usually have a team, or is it just varied off of venues and
Well, it
place
depends.
they
Like the Museum of Fine Arts, it was a museum that didn't really work with the artists themselves because the museum would accession works. So you'd have these works from collections, either ours or another lender. Um, so conversely, like the Rice University Art Gallery, which is where I worked prior to the Museum of Fine Arts, was an installations only uh, venue, and it very much was where the curatorial and the director and all the staff that worked there, which was a very small staff, would work with artists, develop a rapport even before the artist came on site, and then they would assemble all of the materials needed that were requested by the artist, and then there would be weeks of installation, literally weeks of installation, and then an exhibition that would go on. So it was a very different dynamic. How the what the input of the person who created the work wanted to see. At the Museum of Fine Arts, it's the curators who have a vision, often more academic view of how they want to install. Often, like they will develop like a whole like labels and other didactic materials which are educational. So they very much had art kind of in service of sometimes in service of a concept or a thematic exploration. And then working with the artists at the Blaffer, it's just like they were handed over a large space, and it was a playground for them to install on. and you often saw really spontaneous art making, and really just kind of responding to the space. Kind of like the space became an extension of the art making. Um, and so that was the freedom that was afforded them. So two very distinctly different dynamics, and it started to change a little bit when Museum of Fine Arts started doing some of their installations. They started collecting works by artists that were very complicated, and to some degree or another, they would have artist input, or they might have studio input, meaning the artist might delegate their skills of figuring out this collaboration between the studio and the museum. Um, so yeah, there's sometimes there's a little bit more interaction of the artist actually having input, but and then other times they do have or like a participation, but it's less so on the installations level and often more with the interaction between the artists and curators, like artists and directors, and the artists and possibly members of the board.
Okay, so to kind of touch back on those ideas of transitioning, I wanted to ask about the transition from someplace like the Museum of Fine Arts to Blasser, the smaller gallery, and then now to with MeowWolf. Can you kind of give us your story and
Yeah,
experiences?
yeah, absolutely. The The Museum of Fine Arts Houston was, at the time, I believe, about 730 people, huge staff, a massive machine of work, and um, consistent. There were very little breaks. And that was starting to be something I was not necessarily needing, but like a different pace was what I kind of hoped to find. And did so in the Blasser, because the Blasser, in comparison to the Museum of Fine Arts, was 9 full staff members, or nine positions at the time I started. Um, and yet, it was some of the hardest work I'd ever done, and some of the more interesting work. And that very much was, they were also a museum, because they were not collecting. They worked extensively with artists, the curators, and the exhibitions manager, director of exhibitions at the time. Um, and so the pace of that was really enjoyable, and sometimes not, uh, uh, because it was very much a very compressed section of people working there, and the time frame was different. But the real pleasure was working with the artists, and also working with the students. That it's not student facilities, and that was really fun. And then the artists reached out to me and uh, had uh, started asking, saying that they had some available positions at MeowWolf Houston, and I love MeowWolf. For those who haven't been to them, they're kind of the seemingly the pinnacle of installation art installations uh, generated by artists. And what I mean by that is, I think there is a real interest in people to develop installation art that is more driven by the vision of people who are seeing other things, and they're like piggybacking off of the installation artist and then trying to make a version of their own. But MeowWolf are, in my mind, the best version of it, because they're continually employing actual artists and conceptualizing their ideas, and that their ideas are piggybacking off of narrative ideas that they've threaded through all 5 exhibitions, all 5 venues that they have. And I'd seen everyone, myself and my family had seen every single MeowWolf that was open at the time. So I knew what I liked, and when they opened up in Dallas, I was like, okay, well, we got one within a driving distance. That was fun. And then they're opening up a second one in Texas, and I was like, well, anywhere but Austin. When it became Houston, I was very excited, and then they reached out, and I was doubly thrilled. In part because MeowWolf, as I knew it then, pretty much the Venn diagram of all the things I'm interested in doing and like working with, with people and concepts. That kind of converged on MeowWolf. And having seen the other venues, they're very ambitious and they just do a thing that I really was excited about working with and still am.
It's a wild place. Like, no pun intended. Like, I went there for the first time. I spent a good 3 hours there and still feel like I missed a lot. Like, um,
You probably did.
yeah. For
Yeah.
those like that don't know, there is an app, and the app does tell you things. And if I remember right, I think there was like 2 spots that I didn't have sync of with my app that I'm pretty sure I missed. But I mean, it is very big and kind of just there's so many artists. There's so many, like you said, local, amazing, talented artists. I recognize several of them. I was excited to see a former professor of mine from UHD, L. Franco Lee III, was had a whole like space and wall, and I recognized his art instantly. I was like, I know that guy.
Awesome.
How does working with that space and working with artists? I know you kind of touched on it a little bit, but like, did that kind of change your perspective on how you work with artists in your exhibition practices and like how you view everything?
It was an introduction to a way of MeowWolf's what's called the Art Team Task Force. And that task force is literally a collection of people who are managing all the creatives within the building. And there are creatives that have come from Santa Fe, which is where Meow originated from. And then they were collaborating all with the Houston artists. And so I was part of the installation itself, meaning prior to opening to the public, there are months of this building being developed, being worked on by all sorts of contractors, and all sorts of work was happening when, sometimes the lights were working, sometimes they weren't. Sometimes, you'd walk into a room and you'd have 8 or 9 lifts up in the air when the general contractors were building up high. And so you had to kind of cut around rooms that you had hoped to have access to, or eventually would have access to, but they're completely blocked off by flurry of activity. And in the midst of that, you had the Art Team Task Force managers who were the folks who were overseeing and delegating and helping the artists there know when they can work in their rooms, when there's activity that was going on that unfortunately meant that they couldn't work in a room, and so a lot of times you have these people who had fully figured out an idea and they had done so with MeowWolf. MeowWolf was not surprised by the works that were going on and said they'd really collaborated and kind of they said that here's how you can work in a space. Here's if you have a need for electricity, well then now we know to put in power and data. And do you have need sound? You have sound. And so the needs of the artists were to a large degree already predetermined. And then the artists were kind of sprung upon their own spaces and often quite ambitious works because Wolf was ambitious, so the artists that they brought in were ambitious. And it was interesting seeing this simultaneous flurry of art making because you had all these artists working on site, often in spaces in the midst of construction. And then you'd have these artists who were taking breaks and they would be walking around and seeing other artists in the midst of their art making. And it was really, it's something that you see the results of it at MeowWolf, but it was a very fun dynamic to be in the midst of a collection of people making and problem solving. And the works that were provided by Santa Fe are the ones that are more thematic. They talk about the narrative of the show. They provide the environments where you can see on occasion characters, but you see like the expansion of the story in the other ones. And then the artists themselves don't have to integrate their art making within the storytelling and the themes. And that's why they're so sometimes strikingly different. And that's a purposeful thing helping or taking direction or cues from the works that were on display. And it's one of the really special things about the Houston one is they're integrating Houston artists into the venue. You know, it's not automatically intended to just be like a representation of Houston in the venue itself, but like you see images and iconography and artists who have been doing their thing, and it is a clear, a very good flavor of Houston within this really interesting place. And all of that was facilitated by one of the most educational things I had encountered was the system in which the morning meetings that we had every morning, the managers we'd all congregate in this one room. All of us were in our high visibility vests and our hard hats, and there would be between 13 and 40 people in that room, like throughout the group. And so this whole collection of people were being given tasks and being allocated to some of the creative directors, or they were their augurs themselves, or they were telling what they needed, or they were. It was just a very interesting, involved process to manage all of us within the context of this big machine that was moving forward towards opening day. And the folks who did it, the managers, were extremely empathetic. They were extremely focused, and they had to be because it really was, it was managing people who were putting this whole place together, which is a very difficult thing. And often it was a thing that was being learned on site how to do, because sometimes, and quite a bit, there are issues where problems would arise and the solutions needed to come quickly in order to not fall behind. And so both the art making and the problem solving and the creativity was all well oriented. And that was it was really a pleasure to see that happening.
I love it. It's a fantastic place, and I could see definitely, like you were saying, the influences of the Houston artists. Like there is, it's not like you said, it's just a visual representation. Like you can feel like Houston in there. Like you can definitely see the parts where it is MeowWolf, and then where it's the Houston artist. Like it's very welcoming. I appreciated my whole time there, and I think one of my favorite things that I'm glad I saw they did was the whole credit kiosk where you could search the artists and search the names and stuff like that. And I remember seeing your name, and you have a couple of pieces in there, don't you? That you actually made.
I participated in a bunch of the installations. Mainly, a lot of my time was spent in Cowboy Heaven. So there isn't necessarily a piece of art that I made, but I pretty much had my hands on that whole place in one degree or another. And I do hope to have something I can point to more in the future, which is one of the benefits of working there is that it's not a static place. There's still, when we had something called the handoff, which is where various creative directors, before we opened to the public, they'd walk around with us and they'd see things and like, not so much things that were left completely undone, but there was stuff that we were still figuring out and we're going to have to figure out after we open to the public. And then like small installational aspects or sometimes technical details. But also there's an area called the Alley, which is kind of like a small, almost looks like a collection of small storefronts, 2 stories tall. And there are spaces on that have huge amounts of signage, and then there's some blank spots there. And the blank spots were pointed out to us by the creative director, and she told us to think about what needs to go there and what needs to go there was something that we would come up with ourselves. And so the opportunity to kind of not just be caretakers, but to also be participating, that's kind of great about that place. So and the credits kiosk I think is really important because they really do. There's a few people behind the scenes who are continually, at the time before we opened and even after we opened, were continually assembling names and their responsibilities in an effort to make sure that no one was uncredited in their participation of the place. And that's one of the things that I think is one of the strengths of MeowWolf is that there is a desire to always attribute, which isn't always the case. You go to other museums and you're the staff that's behind the installations. But this is just a different flavor of opportunity and one I'm happy about.
The staff is very recognizable there, and I think it's amazing how you can tell like especially this like that's the only can we talk to this location, but it feels that they're very proud of the artist, very proud of everyone who has their hands on it, and it's kind of nice to see that and hear it, especially from someone who's still there.
Yeah, and my real hope is that a lot of the people who worked on it, I hope that this is a springboard for them, because it's a very good place to bring people, and they can point to a pretty expansive and pretty, especially the Houston artists, and it's almost completely unlikely that anything's going to change within those rooms unless something unusual happens. And so that permanent opportunity to show outside of like public art is kind of a rare opportunity. So we have our artists coming in and bringing people, and that's great. I mean, like I said, it's a springboard. Hopefully, one that can really use as a jumping off point. And I will say that the Santa Fe, a lot of the Santa Fe artists who came in, these are extremely accomplished people who have built 4 of these so far, and there's more to come. Houston was the 5th, and they were really impressed with the caliber of art that was coming out of the city, and it was really nice to hear that from them, because these are folks that don't have to say that, and but they did, and they liked it.
And so, that's amazing.
Yeah, and I think it's really a great. A lot of the places are great showcases of local artists, and I think one of the things is to see the variety of stuff that you see in Houston is indicative of like what you see in other large cities too, and I think it's good for local artists to know that there's a pretty well of talent in town.
Yeah, there's being in the arts leadership program and being surrounded by so many artistic peers, and even now working with my time at Fresh Arts, like it's all really opened my eyes to just how talented Houston is, and how many artists and just how many like up and coming artists there are with like dreams and desires to do so much. To kind of like facilitate that idea and help them, I have a couple of other questions, just general like logistical questions. One of those things being, in your experience when approaching an exhibition space, like if you are hired on and they're like, hey, the curators wants to help create a show in this area, what is like the first main things you look for, and like what are some things to keep in mind as an artist when you're looking at a new exhibition space?
I think that's an interesting question, because it's almost artist and venue specific. So like the folks who are inviting you into a venue should be kind of experts in their venue. They should know what goes in well, what goes in budget, and what would be harder to do. So either they can figure out extra time and money and resources to accommodate a show, or curate accordingly if they find that they're very interested in something, but it just doesn't play nicely with their building. Like, if it's an old building that doesn't have a very strong ceiling, well, it'd be very difficult to suspend works from there. Most places are built with pretty strong floors and pretty strong walls, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes they have weird idiosyncrasies, a lot of places. And so, just in terms of that very straightforward logistical aspect, the originating institution needs to have a good grasp of what it takes to properly install works in its own space, and then the artist both artists and curators often come to installations with very specific things in mind or visions in mind, or sometimes they don't. Like the curators often do, but the artists sometimes either have respond very specifically to a place, and they're like, I would like to see stuff here, and then that vision often always changes once the art lands in the gallery or the museum, and that artist and curator. Um, The installers facilitate a lot of the moving of the artwork. Obviously, we're the labor that unpacks and puts things on the wall or puts things on the floor for people to see. But also, we are the folks that sometimes say there are things about your building that you need to put this big piece here, but not there. Like the Blaffer on occasion would bring in structural engineers to see if what we were asking to do would work. Like, is the floor sound enough to hold, sculpture that's 2,200 pounds at an angle? Or can humans suspend something like 3,000 pounds? And they were yes, they could. But in both cases, it was a little specific to within the gallery itself. Here's the only place where you can hang this piece from the ceiling. Here's one of the few places, or the only place the artist wants this piece is put in the main gallery. And if those places hadn't worked out, then it starts in this conversation where it's like your idea that you would hope to envision just is not accommodated by the building. And so you have to be able to pivot, and then a lot of times artists and curators both start responding to the placement of works, and it almost becomes an extension, not necessarily of the art making, but definitely of the showcasing of the artwork. That you see colors and themes, um, all different characteristics of the artwork that informing you in a way that you may not have been able to figure out by anyone else on the project.
Yeah.
Um, being flexible, being able to pivot is a thing that is a good skill, especially if it helps improve the.
That's definitely one thing we learned uh, in my UH program when I took my exhibitions and curation class. You actually you got to help us with that and talk to us, and it's a process. And I know a lot of our my peers in that class, we had to definitely adjust and pivot our ideas on how to do installations, and it's kind of interesting because while we were kind of playing curator, we were also playing installer, and then now we were having to deal with the artist and what they wanted and what they wanted to see and how they wanted their artwork. And we actually did have an artist come in and go, I don't like the artwork right there. And we're like, unfortunately, that's the only space that it's gonna work.
Yep.
Due to like just the size of the art, the angle, the lighting, and like it's the only sound place. And I'm kind of curious, like, what you kind of said it a little bit, the flexibility. How, like, what advice would you give to artists when they're going into an exhibition space? To like, what are some key things to remember that like maybe your dream, but like there's be reasonable reality kind of stuff.
I think a lot of it is that hopefully, if you're entering into a space and you have felt like the people that you're working with are um, you're going to play nicely together with them, is that for the most part everyone's intentions are good, and that I know at the Blaffer we very much were in service of the art and the artists, and it was both fun to work with them, but it's also fun and given the time to show them options that they may not have imagined. Or like we had a show where several pieces did not arrive in time, so we had to reconfigure the gallery a little bit to showcase what we had and also leave a space and some flexibility when the new pieces came in. And so to be accommodating towards that was something that the artist responded to very well, but it's like, we have to let them know that we want them to do that. So there are all sorts of personalities within the museum. There's also personalities outside of the museum and within the art world. And it's not always the case that people are going to be easy to work with, but hopefully the case is that they, at least in the art planning department, and my people I've worked with, we took a lot of extraordinary care trying to be as careful as possible with the artwork. So we'd like to kind of extend that good feeling towards not just the handling, but the suggestions. Having done the experience of doing a lot of art installation, you be very familiar with some of the ways that things do showcase, or things like oddities of architecture where it's like you would think this would look really nice in this corner, but because of the compromises within the track lighting, it doesn't do well. And we can show you if you demand us to do a bunch of work, and then you will hopefully come around to our realization. So you can just shortcut that process, and the suggestions that are given to you are respected and appreciated, because we wouldn't be in this business if we didn't at least enjoy the company of artists and artists.
Yeah. It's definitely taking myself out of the artist and putting myself in like an arts leader position. I've noticed having to remember sometimes to like stay humble. These people that are already in these positions do in fact like they're professionals for a reason. Um, so I do agree that, like you said, as long as everyone goes into it with good intentions and open mindedness, I feel like that's the reason why we see so many good shows and good places. Um, but I know not everything goes like super smoothly. What is like this? My generation, from what I've realized, we're very much can-do people. We love to do our own things.
Yep.
With so many like new tiny art spaces and like local art spaces and stuff like that, what are like? Have you noticed any like common mistakes that people make that you could probably give advice to help artists avoid when they're doing self installations?
I think it's something that stems from art schools, and it's something I had worked with a little bit at UH, was an opportunity to go into a classroom and teach or talk about best ways of adding hardware, best ways of packing artwork, and hardware that puts things on a wall, puts things on a pedestal, and helps protect works going to and coming from an exhibition often aren't very expensive, but they can be pretty critical in terms of protecting the investment, an artist's investment. I mean, artists are so used to fixing their own work that they sometimes don't realize that's not what other venues want to do or can do. And so, like if a painting corner got dinged in a studio, an artist would just put some paint on it. But if it got dinged in a gallery, or it becomes quite a complicated thing for them to resolve. And so anything, techniques that really help protect your artwork are twofold, in part because they secure them in the venue that they're being exhibited, but it also shows a level of competence and professionalism that is easily registered when pieces arrive at a place. If you see something that's well packed, it kind of signals an intention behind the artist that they are trying their best and that they've been taught how to do the best. And sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes at the Bradford, we received a collection of artwork. Half of it was from the artist studio, and half of it was from galleries and collectors. And the packing was completely different because the artists, the collectors and galleries had a ton of money, and they could spend it on the means of protecting these pieces to travel nationally. And the artists had done good collars, but even that, they weren't as good as they could have been. But that's often a thing that you learn in art handling and not in the classroom. And so, I would highly recommend they try to seek out possible mentors and people in the art handling industry and learn frugal, affordable ways to improve on their packing, because you'll always be shipping things, and since often early career artists won't be able to afford professional art handling, And there's a huge difference between professional art handlers, UPS, and all the other services. And one is that people in professional art handling potentially will get fired if they don't handle your works great, and that's not good. So, the professional services are dedicated to transiting pieces to and from wherever they're going, from the house in Bel Air to U8 or nationally and internationally. And there's just a level of care that they take, and anything you can do to help them move your pieces is going to go a long way towards, again, it's your investment. Like, artists who don't have a lot of money still have their artwork, and that's their reputation and livelihood on. And the often second go or last because, um, holy crap, I just got a show in a gallery that's awesome. A friend of mine who works in the finance told me the story. He's in grad school, and he put two pieces in his house that he's going to get in photograph, and he didn't have them secured very well, and a quick stop came with two of them to the point where he could never get them photographed again. And so finding the people that can help learn, and again, like cardboard solves so many problems. Specialized cardboard techniques can wrap it in a way where you can move it in a van, or truck, or pickup truck. There are all these ways that have been figured out to move artwork, and some of them are not going to break your bank, and it's worth the time to do that, either because you're storing works in your gallery, in your studio, or you're moving them in a car, and you don't think they need to be protected, because what can happen, and then something happens, and you will find yourself a huge favor by just figuring these things out and seeing the solutions that are in place that you may not be familiar with.
It's definitely like a struggle for me personally, figuring that stuff out. Like figuring out like how to store giant paintings that I have. I'm like they're wrapped in a trash bag and a trundle under my bed, and it's just
Yep. So that's how it happens.
Yeah, and it's I'd never like it is a struggle, and I feel like it's definitely something they kind of don't teach us in art school. Is we create art, we do stuff, and that we all have like our own little techniques, and I feel like as long as we remember, like you said, this is our livelihood, and just yeah,
it's a niche skill because museums and galleries need it, and other places don't. Other just businesses do different things business wise, but so searching out those folks and those resources is not the easiest of things. But people like folks from Thai Art, folks from 360. These are local art handling companies, and there's some other ones in town that I'm less familiar with. And then the folks at the Museum of Fine Art are so knowledgeable, but they're also so busy. So they're not necessarily someone that you can just call up and say, "Hey, I don't know how to move this," and they're like, "Well, we're really busy because five multi-millionaire billionaires are deciding to renovate their houses, and we need to move all their stuff out we need to move all their stuff in because we're going to have a party for 400 people one of their months." So I'm not quite sure how you cultivate those relationships, but those folks are the experts in protecting works for artists and owners, and so I don't quite have the answer to how to meet these people.
That's what I feel like. There's a market for that. Definitely, maybe we at Fresh Arts could figure out and help out with. But in the last kind of minutes, I've enjoyed our talk and our time here today. I don't want to spend too much longer holding up your time, but I've enjoyed it. It's amazing to get to talk to you again. Thank you so much for taking the time out to be with us and help us with this interview. Is there any like last minute thoughts, final advice, any places that you think would be worth for artists to check out for any installation help or exhibition help? And
Not right now. It's an interestingly tough time, and I don't know how it's going to shake out. Um, so I think, especially in this time, you're not that y'all are already creative, but I think you'll have to be particularly so. Um, I mean, show anywhere. Don't be picky. You never know where your pieces are going to end up in front of who's going to see your works, and um, yeah, better. I think right now, especially, but I think just in general, it's like, you know, you don't need to be particularly fussy about where you're ending up right now, because you can pick and choose where you end up later, especially if you start developing fans, collectors, patrons, uh, people who just love your work. Um, then you can be more, you can pick and choose more in the future. Don't be picky now. Just make as much as you can without that.
that's the best advice I've had in a long time. Just keep making the art. Just make the art. Doesn't matter if it's good or bad. Just make art.
Yeah.
All right. Well, once again, thank you so much for your time. Um, if there's any other questions for people, we'll connect you. We'll stay connected. We'd love to work with you again at Fresh Art.
Great.
Other than that, I hope you have a good night, and thank you all for watching and staying with us tonight. But nice. Have a good night.
Bye. Good.